member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. On Tuesday, Senator Paul sent a letter to FBI Director Chris Wray, writing, quote, "In light of recent reports describing Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's extensive discussion at work of their political vendetta against President Donald Trump, I am concerned about their continued access to sensitive private information, such as that contained in FISA databases. Is there a process in place to routinely analyze searches of databases by agents to ensure that such searches are not done for political or personal reasons? The exposure of political bias at the FBI is exactly why many of us advocate for greater oversight of the FBI. If openly biased agents such as Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page still have access to classified databases, one might argue the FBI's internal controls are inadequate." Senator Paul, it's good to have you with us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Do you have concerns based on the texts alone between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page about the integrity of Bob Mueller's investigation, about the integrity of the FBI?
I guess my concerns are even really broader than that. You know, from the very beginning of our republic, we worried that police power, which includes the FBI, needed to have a check and balance with judicial power. And so if policemen are in hot pursuit of a criminal, you don't want a policeman who doesn't like black people or Jewish people or gay people. And so if that could possibly happen, bias, they're supposed to call a judge who's supposed to be dispassionate at a distance and not, hopefully, someone who's been selected for not having bigotry. And so it can happen on both sides. I mean, during the Hoover era, we had the right wing spying on civil rights leaders, on anti-war protesters. It's gone on in every generation. FDR had an enemies list. Nixon had an enemy list. So both sides have done this. So I'm very concerned in an era where we can record everything. Every one of your phone calls could be collected. I mean, we have that extraordinary power. So we have to be careful that there is somebody overlooking the police. And that's not to say that they're bad, but I think Strzok and Page's texts indicate how biased somebody could be, and that we have to be a little bit careful about how much power we give people.
I take your broader point for sure. I'm just curious, in this particular case, do you believe that the text between the two of them, as you know, Peter Strzok was taken off the Mueller investigation when former Director Mueller found out about them. Do you believe that those texts alone indicate a bias or a corruption of the investigation?
I guess the way I would put it to you is, if two federal judges were sending those texts back and forth, would you be concerned? And so if these people are not overseen by a judge, yes, I'm very concerned that their texts show that they were not only biased, but they're at work communicating about it, and they're enlivened by this to a great degree that we've got to do something to stop him from being president. He probably won't, but if he is, we have to have an insurance policy. That does concern me.
Have you seen or read all of the texts? All of the texts?
I think hundreds and hundreds of them. I've seen the ones that have been selected out.
And what about the CNN report, Senator, that's out this morning that says that, in fact, Peter Strzok was one of the agents who initiated and advocated for reopening the Clinton investigation? That letter, of course, put out 10 days or so before Election Day. Does that change the way you feel about his bias?
I think it needs to be investigated. I don't know enough to know one way or another. I know that the ones that have been released really indicate a great deal of animus towards Donald Trump, the candidate, and towards Donald Trump, the president. And if the thing is that's why you want somebody overseeing. So the reason I asked Christopher Wray this question is, I don't want them going to a database because someone donated to Donald Trump and saying, I'm going to search this person, I'm going to get him, by golly. That's why I want a judge inserted. And the saddest thing about this whole memo from Congressman Nunes is he withheld this sort of scandal until after we reauthorized FISA for 6 years with no reforms, no warrant requirement that actually will control this. And so the same bias that you're worried about, that Nunes is worried about, he did nothing to reform the system. He gave them more power.
In your letter to Director Wray, Senator, you call for greater oversight of the FBI. Can you define what greater oversight means, given the oversight that we already have?
The greater oversight would be that they and the intelligence community at large have a great deal of an ability, almost an unlimited ability, to collect data. There was a story saying we collected everyone's phone call in and out of Italy for a month, everyone's phone call. So we can record all of this. There needs to be someone overseeing who's allowed to look at this, particularly for an American. And so in the FISA databases, we're supposed to be spying on foreigners in foreign lands, but millions of Americans are caught up in that database, including journalists, including including politicians, including businessmen and women, and including maybe just people who have a cousin in Lebanon or something. They're in this database. You shouldn't be able to type in an American's name without a warrant. And we've been arguing this before all of this. I was arguing this under President Obama. So this isn't something new. It's a consistent position that the police power needs to be checked by the judicial power.
And oversight is absolutely critical. I couldn't agree more. And yes, sometimes FBI officials make mistakes, but what about the influence that the president is now exerting over the Justice Department? Isn't that equally as concerning to see that branch of government overstepping in that way?
I think what we learned in the lead up to this last election, particularly with the FBI looking at both of the major candidates, is that we do need to be a little bit wary, and we probably need to review whether or not and how much we're going to let the FBI get involved in political campaigns, because the Clinton people probably complained the FBI through the election against Clinton. The Trump people are now saying the FBI was involved in an unfair way, letting Clinton get off scot-free. I'm not sure the truth. You know, we can argue the truth of it. I don't know what the truth is, but maybe the reform we should think about is really should we have a very high bar for investigating political candidates by the FBI? Because think about it this way. If the FBI can record all of our phone calls and then they bring you in, Willie, and they say, okay, we want to interview you now, and they have 1,000 of your private phone calls, and you have to make sure that everything you say is consistent with your 1,000 private phone calls, would that be a fair standard that we want to live under, where they record your private phone calls and then you can go to jail for not saying something consistent with your private phone calls? And so anymore, if you're asked to be interviewed by the FBI, my first question would be, okay, only if you release all the phone calls of you that I have before, so I can review what I said in a phone call.
Well, let's define that a bit further, though. When you're talking about, I think you just said every American's phone calls from Italy were swept up in a surveillance trap. It's not the conversations that are swept up.
Sometimes they are. In FISA, they are. Actually, when we did the bulk collection, the thing was out in Utah that everybody got alarmed about, that was all American and domestic. That was domestic to domestic, and that was metadata. That was emails, who you emailed to without the content, and it was phone calls, who you called and how long. FISA actually collects conversations. So they actually have
under a warrant.
Well, but it's a generalized warrant. They say we want to get all the people in Libya or all the people, and I'm actually okay with a lower standard for foreigners who we are sort of at war with. We don't have a constitutional standard. What I'm very alarmed with is that they collect all that with no constitutional protection, and then what I'm alarmed at is that, well, they could say, Mike Barnacle, he's contributed to this candidate. Let's type his name in, and now let's see if we can find anything on you. And maybe you haven't, all your tax forms aren't correct. Maybe we can get you. See, so domestic accusations should never be prosecuted based on stuff that was intended to be foreign surveillance, because there's no protection. You have no constitutional protection. You also can't challenge a FISA warrant. If I accuse you of something domestically, or the court does, you call your lawyer and say, by golly, we're going to court and we're going to fight that warrant. FISA warrants are secret, so we've made the court that way, but it's a less than constitutional standard, and we've acknowledged that because it's foreigners. But this is something we have to be very careful. You know, somebody's grandkid for pot, are we going to get them out of the foreign surveillance database and put them in jail for pot? That's ridiculous.
So, Senator, just to go back to my original question, based on what you see in those texts between Page and Strzok, do you believe that the investigation undertaken by Bob Mueller has been tainted?
See, I think that Mueller did the right thing, removing them. So he obviously thought there was a danger of tainting. So I think he probably would say yes if you asked Mueller. I think that my concern now is what happens. Federal employees are very well protected, and maybe for good reasons, maybe not sometimes. But these two employees may still work at the FBI for the next 30 years. Should they be investigating the next Republican or Democrat politician comes up? Are they now tainted such that they could not be perceived as being unbiased? But also, do they have access to the database? Can they be typing Americans? Could they be in their office right now typing in a Republican they don't like into a database and finding out stuff about them? And here's the question. If they don't use it in court, what if they just go tell their pal at the IRS and there's no trail of it other than we typed him in, we found out, he was bringing paint home from the office and using it at his home for, breaking an IRS.
But in this specific case, do you believe that the conclusions from the special counsel's office will be tainted, whatever they are, because Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were on the investigation?
Removed.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem than that, that's a possibility.
You do think so?
Yeah, but I think the bigger problem than that is this. is that special counsels have, or prosecutors have, so much power, they go far afield. And I think those who defended Clinton thought that they went far afield. I've become more and more a believer, maybe it's easier because it's a Republican president for me to believe this, but that they have too much power. So we're going after Flynn for making conversations inconsistent with, you know, a private conversation that he had. And then we're going after Manafort for something that may have broken the law but has nothing to do sort of with the mandate of the special prosecutor. So, yeah. So would it be fair to bring the president in and go through 30 years of business records and find out that there was an IRS violation? No, I think that'd be unfair, and that's not really the mandate. And I think, you know, that's, if I were advising the Trump administration, I'd be very worried that they want to go back 20 years of my business records and make, you know, maybe I didn't cross the T's and dot the I's on all my tax forms.
Joe.
So, Senator, let's just talk more generally about the FBI and the concern about the FBI being attacked by all sides. You can go back to the middle of the campaign. It was the Democrats who were attacking the FBI, saying they were on a witch hunt against Hillary Clinton. Then Comey didn't charge Senator Clinton. Then it was Republicans saying that the FBI was slanted against them. Then Peter Strzok and Comey draft a letter. Comey sends it out 10 days before the election. Then it's the Democrats again attacking. And now, of course, you've got the Republicans doing the attacking. So how do we make sure that the FBI can do their job without partisans on both sides attacking them if they don't like the direction those investigations are going in?
You know, I would probably start from the premise that 98% of the FBI, 98% of local police are good people and most of the time do the right thing. But at the same time, you know, when we talk about police, it's not that I'm anti-police, but I still do think there have been some abuses, particularly of minority rights and minorities in our cities, and that the police do need more oversight, and we need to make the system better. Same with the FBI, there needs to be more oversight. But with the FBI, it may be even bigger than that. Maybe we need to be more careful and figure out a way that the FBI doesn't insert itself into campaigns, because, you know, them using the Oppo research potentially from Clinton to get a warrant is worrisome. Them, you know, particularly going after the email server in the middle of that may have hurt Clinton. So it really goes both ways. I don't think we've ever had a situation where the FBI was this much involved in the middle of a campaign. In fact, usually they're hesitant to get involved in political questions, and a lot of times they say the electorate's going to decide this, and people make accusations on both sides, but the FBI doesn't weigh in. So I think the biggest problem was, and this is really a decision that Comey made, and Comey probably should have been fired for many reasons, but one, because maybe he was unfair to Clinton, and two, because maybe he was unfair to Trump, but maybe the problem was that he was over-involved in an election season when he should have been quiet.
Right, and certainly violated a lot of practices that FBI directors usually don't violate. You either indict somebody or you don't. He did indict Hillary Clinton, and then he tore to shreds in a press conference. So I guess the bigger point is the FBI can't be biased against Democrats one month and then biased against Republicans the next, then biased against Democrats again, and now biased against Republicans.
But you don't get those threats if maybe they're not involved in politics so much. And so McCabe, you know, when you look at his history, his wife's a Democrat, they get all this money from the McAuliffe-Clinton machine, and yet none of that would have ever come up. He would have served honorably and finished his tour had they not gotten so involved. Now we're asking a question. He had something sitting on his desk for 3 weeks that he didn't bring up. Was that bias towards Clinton? They're going to question every one of his motives and everybody else's, and maybe it does get to be unfair. But it wouldn't be had the FBI not decided to get involved both in the Clinton investigation and the Trump. And I think that's the problem we have, is we got too involved with politics with the FBI.
Senator, before we let you go, I don't think most people watching fully appreciate how serious and violent the attack on you was by your neighbor in November. How is your health now?
You know, better. I still struggle, but I can't even describe to you how painful it was in the first 5 weeks. You know, I had 6 fractures, 3 of them displaced. The bones will never be straight. They'll sort of heal in a crooked fashion now. And so every time I move, you feel the bones grinding on the bone. And so I'm getting better, but I still struggle with it.
You've had pneumonia a couple times as well?
Pneumonia a couple times, fluid around the lungs, and I hope it's all sort of something that's an overcoming, and I do feel better than I did, but it's a relative term.
We hope you keep healing.
Yeah, we wish you the best. Thank you for being on this morning.
Thank you.
Senator Rand Paul. And speaking of the intel community,